Welcome back to Overnight Accountant's Real Estate Agent Tax Cut Library, where we are continuing to discuss the home office deduction. In this lesson, we're going to introduce the actual cost method of the home office deduction to you. And we're also going to discuss part one of the Form 8829, which is determining the square footage of your home that is used for your home office. First, let's do an overview. As I just mentioned, a home office deduction is reported on Form 8829, which we'll show you in just a moment. Deducting actual expenses of your home office, however, can be very complex, and it can also be time-consuming due to the number of receipts and everything that you need to keep to prove your deduction. As a result of this complexity, there are many errors and misunderstandings with regard to Form 8829, and that's one of the reasons the Internal Revenue Service created the simplified method, was basically because it's pretty complicated and a lot of folks made mistakes on it, and it was hard to keep the records. And the simplified method, for all practical purposes, is really what we would call a safe harbor in tax world. All you need to do is be able to prove the square footage, and it's actually a pretty square footage of your home office, and that your home office is actually used regularly and exclusively for business, as we discussed in the last lesson. And that's a pretty good deal. It's not a very bad deduction taking a simplified method, but this is actually about the actual cost method. This is actually about the actual cost method, I should say. And the complexity is kind of illustrated in Form, Publication 587, and that is actually business use of your home. It is 35 pages long, and that might not seem like a lot until you realize that that's 35 pages of IRS publication 4 to 6 point font. It's also a lot of legalese. It's kind of hard for the average person to understand, and that's one of the reasons complexity and errors do occur. One of the challenges with the actual cost method is that you're required to track and prove all the expenses claimed with regard to your home office. Because you're claiming actual expenses, you need to be able to prove every deduction that you're claiming, and let's say that's 12 months of electric bills, water and sewer, all these different items. You must track them and then prove the use of them for that particular tax year, and maybe a couple tax years later before you have to prove that to the IRS. In this course, we're going to help you maximize your deduction while minimizing your chance for errors. We do recommend, if you're taking the actual cost method, that you do have a professional prepare your return. It's not completely necessary, but it is relatively complex, and we do hope you will consider having a professional, particularly when you get into depreciation and carryovers. It can be, a lot of errors can still be made even if you believe you know what you're doing, and even if you're taking a course like this. But we are going to help you do the best you can. Now, the question we do, actually some advice we would give you if you do your own tax return, is we hope that you will use the same software year after year while you're claiming the home office. And we also want to make sure you update that software for your prior year return when you prepare that. When you open the software up for 2019, you want to bring forward your tax return for 2018, because there are carryovers that you have to enter, and the software should do it automatically. If not, you're going to have to do it manually, and you have to know how to do that. With the actual cost method, certain costs can create a loss. These costs are qualifying interest and real estate taxes relative to the home office. They can be deductible even if they create a business loss, unlike the simplified method, which cannot be used to create a loss, and you lose any losses created because of the simplified method. Other expenses and depreciation, however, must be carried forward into the following tax year, and that's why it's so important that you use the same software each year, or you're going to lose that deduction. All right, so let's continue here. We'll dig in right at the using the actual cost method. As I mentioned earlier, Form 8829, which we'll show you here in a moment, is what you report the home office actual expenses on. We're going to cover the office in the home, which is really the most common for most realtors. If you do have a separate structure on your property that your home is located on, the rules are very, very similar. However, you're going to have more what we call direct expenses, which we'll discuss in a later lesson. We're going to highlight major items and errors to avoid as we go through Form 8829. I actually want you to just know what you're doing, how to take the deduction, and how to minimize the chances you're going to get in trouble. So here's Form 8829, business use of your home. You want to go to your resource section and print this out so you follow along. Please feel free to pause me right now and then go ahead and print it out, and you can follow along with what we're doing. We're really going to be talking about part one today, and as you can see, the screen there is pretty small. You won't be able to use it anyways unless you're following along with the printout. Now, using the actual cost method, now we're going to be discussing here, there's going to do this in sections. We're going to discuss indirect expenses later. There's what's called indirect expenses, indirect expenses. We're not going to get into those right now, but indirect expenses, as you'll see later, and depreciation, they are generally based on the square footage percentage of your home office use. So if basically, just to say, if your home office is 10% of the total square footage of your home, that's 10% of your indirect expenses, such as electricity and utilities for the entire home, that you get to deduct. So it's really important that you determine your square footage. And it's a square footage area percentage that is reported in Part 1 of Form 8829. Now, the IRS instructions say you can use any reasonable measurement to reach this percentage. We're going to use the square footage method because it's really the most common and it's the most easy to apply. And as you can see here in Part 1, up here on line 1, that is the area regularly used for business. If you're following along on your Form 8829, that is basically the square footage of your home office area, and that's going to be the length and width times of the room that you're using for the home office. Let's say you're using a spare bedroom that is 10 foot by 12 foot. Multiply the two together, that gives you 120 square feet for the area of your home office. That's the length and the width. Now, what about if you're just using part of that bedroom? Let's say it's a guest bedroom, that you have a bed in there and your relatives use it every now and then, or whoever comes to visit, you allow them to use it. That would be part of a room that you use for business. And you can still take it if it's used regularly exclusively for business. However, that whole room is not used regularly exclusively for business. But if you see you have a desk in there and there's a sitting area around it, you have a filing cabinet, that area, if it's used only for business, will qualify as your qualifying home office. So you can take that area right there that you only use for business, and it'll qualify for your home office deduction. So let's say that area is 6 foot by 5 foot, that's 30 square feet. So you still have a qualifying home office. Now, next, what we need to do on line 2, you want to determine the total area of your home. Again, we're going to use the square footage method. This can be a little confusing because there's not really a specific way to do it. You just need to be reasonable in your calculations, because the idea is to arrive at a business percentage for your shared expenses, so you know how much to deduct. And any reasonable method, according to the IRS, is allowed. To be safe, and this is how we generally do it, this is just to be safe, you want to include all functional space, both finished and unfinished. Now, that would include, let's say, a basement or a garage. If it has heat and electric, that's what I mean by finished and unfinished. As long as it has heat and electric, you could use that area for your home office. I have many clients that use a garage for a home office, and many clients will also use part of their basement for a home office. Some that actually use their whole basement because they're in manufacturing, but that it's not what we consider finished space. But it is functional for the use of the home office, so we would include that in your calculation for your total area of your home. If you only decide to use the finished space, that's mainly your living area of the home, just make sure you're able to argue why you only used that space. So let's do a quick estimate here on a 2-story home. This is really a relatively simple method. Let's say the home's 45 foot long by 30 foot wide. You take 45 times 30, that gives you 1,350 square feet. There you go. Now it's 2 stories. That 1,350 times 2 is 2,700 square feet for the home. So now you know both the square footage of the office area and the square footage of the home. Now you go down to line 3 and you divide line 1 by line 2. Pretty simple. That gives you a percentage. So let's say your office area is 120 square feet. Total square footage of your 2-story home's 2,700 square feet. Percentage of office use, 120 divided by 2,700 is 0.044. And guess what you get? You get 4.4%. That's for the percentage of your indirect expenses that you get to deduct. So you put that in line 3 there, and then because we're not paying any attention to any of this, because that's all if you have a daycare center, and we're discussing real estate agents, so you don't need that, just bring it down to line 7, and you've just finished Part 1 of your Form 8829. Congratulations, and we'll see you in the next lesson.